Hey everyone, it's Michael from Chess Lifestyle, and today's format is pretty budget, but yeah, I'm in Belgrade. I'm doing a lot of traveling. I don't know, sightseeing. So yeah, not too much time to be filming chess. But I really wanted to actually show you today a game I played from the Paracin Open, the last tournament I just played in. Um, and yeah, just to give you a quick rundown on how the tournament went, I actually had a really great start to the tournament. I was on 2 out of 4 against opponents around like 2200 rating. And at that point, um, the next day, I had a really rough day where I lost 2 games, so 0 for 2. And then so I was on 2 out of 6. And then on round 7, I got hit with like a really bad stomach flu. I got hit by the norovirus. So as you can imagine, game 7 went to shit. And yeah, after that, I pulled out of round 8 because I was just like vomiting, and it was just really grim. But then, for whatever reason, the organizer gave me a pairing for round 9, and I was feeling good that morning. So I was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna play and see how it goes. And I managed to win that one. So I finished on 3 out of 9 overall against players all rated higher than me. So pretty happy with the performance, I guess. And one of the games I thought was particularly interesting was my round 4 game, I think. Yeah, round 4 against a FIDE master called Viktor Maximenko from Kazakhstan. And yeah, this is how the game went. So before we actually look at the moves, I wanted to tell you a bit about what goes into preparing for such a player. So I knew my opponent's name and I looked him up online, and I managed to find his chess.com and his Lichess. So for anyone that doesn't know, there is a website called openingtreat.com, and really it's an absolute must for tournament players, even casual players, just like in playing in any, well, okay, maybe not casual players, but like anyone playing in any kind of competition. It's just super useful to be able to check your opponent's openings and create an opening tree based on their games from their Lichess or chess.com accounts. So when I checked my opponent, his like live, like over the board games, he was a d4 player always. And on chess.com, he always played d4, and on Lichess, he played d4 and g3, move 1 g3. So I guess trying to be some tricky move orders. So in the case that he would play d4, I would play the modern Benoni. And I knew which line he was going to play. He was going to play this bishop f4 line, which I'll quickly show here. Something like this. Maybe, I think, knight f3 here, g6, bishop f4. And this is actually a really sharp line, probably the sharpest line in the Benoni. And the point is, if black just plays some bishop g7 here, then white has this queen a4 check, and it gets super, super messy. And basically, whoever knows what they're doing best or can navigate complex, sharp positions will probably come out on top. But honestly, for me, it was just too much to learn. So I've instead, at this point, prepared some a6 move, and I avoid this queen a4 check idea. But yeah, as you'll find out, the game actually didn't go this way. So as you can imagine, I got down to the board and I was expecting 1d4 to be played. And my opponent played 1 knight f3. So I had a long think already on move 1 of the game, because I have 2 options here. Either I play knight f6, hoping for d4, which is the most likely response he would do given that he is a d4 player, and then I can play c5, white plays d5, e6, c4, and we just transpose into a Benoni. Alternatively, here after c5, if he plays some c4, then I'm very happy with this position. This is some Kasparov Gambit line after this kind of stuff. And I also know some theory here, so I would have been happy to see this too. So that was one option, to play knight f6, hoping for 2d4, transposing to something I know. Alternatively, on knight f3, I can stick to playing the Dutch, because this is my repertoire against one knight f3 or one c4. And the thing is, after knight f3, f5, I know I did actually check to see my opponent's games in 1g3, f5, and also 1d4, f5, just to see what kind of moves he does against the Dutch, just in case, for whatever reason, I get stuck into playing a Dutch. And I saw that he plays d4, and he plays like some c4, and he transposes into a classical Dutch, like the traditional, like, I don't know, knight c3, g3, bishop g2, and so on. So I thought at this point, when he plays knight f3, I had the feeling, what if my opponent had seen that I play the classical Dutch, had prepared a specific line against the classical Dutch, and given that classical Dutch is a somewhat dubious opening, maybe he's just prepared a serious line against it. So at this point, I was spooked out a bit, and I went against my repertoire, and I played knight f6. And at this point, he immediately played g3, which is exactly why I don't play knight f6, because I'm really not a fan of these kind of Sicilian-esque, Benoni-esque positions that aren't a Benoni, aren't a Sicilian. And at this point, I was still dreaming of my opponent playing d4, so I played g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, castles, castles, and on d4, I was like, yes! After c5, he might go d5, e6, c4, takes, and we're into a fianchetto Benoni, which I know some theory, which I know what I'm doing. Very happy to play this position as black. But of course, after d4, c5, he immediately played c4. This is all of his prep. He realized that I was a Benoni player, and what I also realized at this point was that the mind games actually go further back. So in fact, in round 1 of this tournament, I played an international master from Kazakhstan. I can't remember his name right now, but it suddenly hit me that my opponent, Maximenko, must have spoke to the international master from round 1 and discussed, hey, like, what are the strong points of this guy? And my game in round 1 went something like this. Opening, completely smashed him. Middle game, going extremely well. And late middle game, I started to mess up. And end game, I got completely outplayed and ended up losing from an absolutely unlosable position. So what I can imagine Maximenko was thinking during this game was, okay, this guy's good at openings, let's get him out of book. So he's already won that battle. Step 2, try and simplify it into an endgame quickly, and then outplay him in the endgame. And as you'll see, I didn't really know what I was doing at this point. I was out of book, so I already felt that he had the psychological edge already. And here, he very quickly went d takes c5, d takes c5, queen d8, trading queens, as we just discussed, and knight a4. He blasted all of this out. Like at this point, you know, we both started the game on 90 minutes. And at this point, he had 89 minutes on the clock. At this point, I went into a deep, deep tank. And on my move, I ended up only having 64 minutes. So already he was 25 minutes up on the clock. So clearly, he had won the opening stage of the game. Like, even if computer evaluation isn't saying this position is winning, just from a psychological perspective, I was already arguably lost. Like, just completely thrown out of my repertoire. White had got exactly what he wanted, trading queens and getting into an endgame against me. So I was definitely not feeling good. So at this point, I was thinking about this move knight a4 and trying to just understand, you know, like how devastating this move really is. And okay, the first point is that he's attacking the pawn on c5. So how am I to defend this? So some defensive ideas I thought of maybe were a move like knight bd7 trying to develop, but this comes onto some issues after a move like rook d1, where the knight is actually pinned to the rook. The rook is undefended because the bishop is not developed, the rooks are not connected, and also if I want to try and connect the rooks, how am I supposed to get this bishop out? Because the bishop can never get out. So after pinning the knight, now the threat is actually to take on c5, and I really didn't like how this was looking. Likewise, if I had played instead knight fd7 to try and defend, yes, all my pieces are very, very badly stuck. Maybe my knight can try and come out to c6, but in this position, bishop e3, and it's really hard to defend this pawn again. And in this position, I'm seriously struggling already. So I then looked at some maybe counterattacking kind of moves, like some bishop e6, like maybe if he tries to take on c5, I can take on c4. But the problem is if we go down this forced line, normally the side that captures first, it generally favors them in calculation. So he captures first, I capture, he captures, I capture, he takes, I take, but now he takes back and the knight isn't in fact trapped. Like the knight is going to be able to escape, and this position is just completely great. Like with this bishop, like I don't think white is surviving this. Sorry, black is surviving this. Like maybe like on rook a7 to try and trap the knight. Like probably maybe simplest is this bishop f4, hitting the knight, and when the knight tries to develop, then the knight can get free and the knight isn't trapped. So I calculated this line and was thinking, okay, this is just not working at all. So what I played in the game instead was the move knight e4. The reason being is because I keep my options of developing open. I don't trap in my pieces. It's a little bit loose of a defensive piece, but I thought I had to just try this. I didn't see anything better. And here my opponent played the move knight g5 very quickly, and I played knight d6, and now he went into the attack. I think he underestimated this move, counter-attacking against the c4 pawn. And here my opponent actually opted to go for knight b6, rook a7, and bishop f4, basically just trying to develop all the pieces, put massive amounts of pressure on my pieces, and I'm really feeling it actually, because, for instance, if let's say I just try to develop at this point, he can take on d6, and already you see how well coordinated his pieces are. Like my pieces are completely uncoordinated. Like this is awkward, this isn't developed, this is stuck behind the pawn. Like white is doing extremely well, and like my pieces are just so uncoordinated. Like if he takes the knight, I can't take back with the rook because my bishop hangs. If he takes if I don't develop the knight and let's say he tries to take the bishop, I have to take back with the rook because if I take back with the knight, then my knight hangs. So basically, in general, my pieces are just very uncoordinated here. And if you like, you can pause the video and just try and think, what is the best move in this position? Because I found the only move to give myself a game, and I was very proud of this move. So, if any of you found the move bishop g4, give yourself a pat on the back, because it's not an intuitive move to find. The idea behind this move is that I just wanted to develop my pieces. In this very moment, I'm not losing anything with this move. And the idea is that I'm just putting a little bit of pressure on this pawn. And there's a little nice tactic. If white tries to play some e3, I can play e5 and trap this bishop. So perhaps he tries to play e4 to try and defend the pawn. But I've got some different ideas. One is just trying to just develop my pieces. This is now a really great outpost for my knight. Maybe I've got some tricks with some double attacks here. So this move kind of provokes the move f3, which is what my opponent played. So my opponent played f3, and the whole idea was that in this position, I drop back to f5. And you definitely needed to analyze this if you were to play the move bishop g4. And a very key move you had to analyze was what happens after e4. Where are you putting this bishop? Because, if you put your bishop here, it might be a target to the knight. If you put it on d7 or c8, is potentially going to get taken by this knight, and white will gain a bishop pair. So what would you do in this position as black? Another key moment. So in this position, after e4, I really banged out the bishop d4 check move with a lot of power to give any kind of like, I don't know, psychological edge and pressure on my opponent. Like, if you saw my Serbia Open vlog, I talked a lot about chess for tigers. Like, really trying to win the psychological battle is, I think, really, really important in over-the-board chess. So I slammed out bishop d4 check. He timidly went to the corner, and I slammed out e5. And this is the whole idea of my whole bishop g4, bishop f5 idea, because, in fact, this works out for me. Like, if he tries to take, I can always take here. And if he takes back, he's got tripled pawns, and, you know, my knight can take on f5. And I've got the preferred structure, an amazing bishop defended by the pawn. This is considered a crystal, written in Jan Marcus's book, Under the Surface. So everything would be working out here. So this was a really, really nice move, but from suddenly being in a worse position and outplayed in the opening, now I was feeling a lot more comfortable. And here, we got this position. I was completely happy with the doubled pawns because I'm covering this weak d5 square that this knight would otherwise have been able to use. And I really liked my position at this point. I thought I played these next few moves quite well. Like here, I need to come up with a plan, so I decided to try and activate these pieces, maybe try and weaken this knight. So I played a5, rook a6, and here I'm just improving my position little by little. Just king g7, maybe cover some of these dark squares. You never know when they might become weak. And the point is here, because I've got such an overwhelmingly strong center, it's really hard for white to come up with a plan. So I continue to develop, and here white realizes he's had enough. He's going to try and break, which is also the correct time. And like the last few moves have all been correct from both sides. So f4 was played, and here my opponent finds this bishop c3 move, which I missed, and it's a little bit tricky because now my center is actually coming under attack from this side, so I need to be very precise here. So I play b6 because I think my c5 pawn is about to drop once he takes on d4. He decides to take anyway, and here, how would you recapture? Would you capture with the e pawn, the c pawn, or the knight? So in fact, according to Engine, knight takes is actually best. And I think the reason for this is, firstly, this pawn isn't actually an issue. If he tries to take, you can play knight f7, and you're winning back the pawn. Your knights are on dark squares. He's got a light squared bishop. They're both centralized. This knight would be an outpost. This knight is sheltered by this pawn. So this would be super, super great for black. And I think the reason why I didn't play knight takes was I wasn't sure how I could actually make progress here. Like, the center is very blocked. And if he just sits, like putting the king back and forth, this is the plan the computer suggests. Knight f7, rook d8, and eventually open the center with ef4 and e5. And the point is something like this, and eventually we're going to be able to open up the pieces. Now the rook is defending laterally this way. This rook can come back into the game somehow, and maybe we can try and open up the king side, and these knights can somehow come in. Something like this. But I didn't see this in the game, so I thought the best chance was to stick with my dynamic style of chess and play c takes d4. And here he played c5. I had to be very precise here, played b5, takes, and we get this position where this all seems pretty forced, and in fact I actually am a pawn down. But at this point, you know, everything simplifies down, and it's time to actually evaluate the position. And what I realized is I was just playing forced moves without really considering too much the consequences of them, and I think same with him. But what we've realized is we get to this position where he's a pawn up, but I have the superior minor piece. And I also have the more active rook. His pawns are actually huge targets. And I'm threatening already to play some rook d4, rook takes a4, defend my pawn from the back, target this pawn from the front. And this bishop's going to be really clumsy to get around to defend a2. So at this point, my opponent, instead of kind of respecting my play over the last, I don't know, 30 moves, he decides to play for tricks. And this move is just playing for tricks because if I try some rook d4, then he can get a big attack on my e6 pawn. And now maybe white is taking over the initiative with the active pieces. But very fast after rook b1, I slammed out king f6 to show my opponent that I am completely aware of his plans and I don't trust him. And I think that's why rook b1 is just playing for tricks, because it makes more sense to keep the rook on the f file to limit my king. So I wasn't a fan of rook b1 at all. And here, now after rook back, I guess he was thinking, this 1900 is going to play for a draw, go back to g7, and then he would play a better move. But no, of course not. I'm going to improve my king, bring it to the center, give myself more options to both sides of the board. So here, my opponent tries to activate his king, and now my rook is the first to get active. So I take on a4, he tries to defend, but now my knight is already coming in to harass my opponent's rook. And we get this position where I actually now go a pawn up, and I've got this outside pawn, which gives me chances. Now, in fact, actually, I played rook takes a2 pretty quickly, but instead, I actually had a nice finesse in this position to give myself better chances. So pause the video if you want to try and find that move. And that move is king f6. The idea is to stop white from playing e5. And I kind of played this move quickly, and I was like, oh no, what if he plays e5, which he did. And the point is now, my king's activity is limited, and I'm going to be pushed onto the back rank. But I've still got this very dangerous pawn, so he has to play very carefully. And what he tries to do is bring his bishop around, and we get to this position, and here I actually have a nice move to try and play for an advantage, play for the win. So have a think, try and calculate what strongest continuation is here. So the best move actually is to play rook b2. And the idea is that, okay, you give up this pawn, but your pawn gets very active. He tries to get behind it, but you have this really lovely move, which, because you've got this discovered check, you're going to win a piece. So if he tries to win the pawn, you take back with check, and now you defend your piece with another check. And here, you've still got two pawns. This has decent winning chances, perhaps, but it's definitely not clear, and many more moves will need to be played, but this was definitely my best chance. So, in fact, I played rook a1, and we got into this position. And here, again, I had the chance to play rook b1. And I think I did look at this in the game, but I really wasn't sure whether to go into this, given that he had this strong pawn. He was going to get an active king. And what I think I just didn't calculate properly was here I thought he could come towards the center, and maybe like these pawns would drop, and I was just not down to play this with the knight. But in fact, actually, if he tries to come to f3, then I'm going to take on h2. So he would have to play king h3, which means that his king is a bit passive, being stuck defending this pawn. But still, I felt these pawns were weak, and I just didn't want to risk it. So I played knight d3 check, knight b4, and here we simplified into this draw. But at this point, my opponent was still playing for a win. Like I offered a draw, and he pushed rook a7 out impatiently. So here I played rook e7, having calculated the pawn endgame, and I fancied my chances here for it to be a draw. Now after king f4, I still have to be careful. Like I can still mess this position up, perhaps. So in this position, what would you play as black to try and secure the draw? So, for instance, if you said a move like king e6, you'd have to be extremely careful, because suddenly the king is entering in and getting extremely active. And if your king gets put on the passive here, it's probably still drawn, given that you've got this square to just keep moving back and forth and defending this pawn. But you do need to be slightly careful, because if your king gets here and you have no pawn moves, and your king doesn't have any moves, then white has the extra tempo to try and put you on the back foot. So here, luckily, I looked at the move g5 check, and it's working because after king e4, I can play the move g4, and on king f4, h5. And I essentially, after h5, take the opposition, and now he's got no way in, and we agreed a draw at this point. So I thought it was a really interesting game. I was very proud of my bishop g4 move to try and get back in the game. Give me a second.
Hey everyone, it's Dylan. I'm filling in for Michael, who is at this very moment distracted, no doubt by a member of the female persuasion. I'm just going to give a couple thoughts before the conclusion of this video. I thought the most fascinating part of this game was the preparation and the mind games that went into the opening. Very fascinating. Classic Russian collusion, it sounds like. But Michael showed really nice resilience, and really happy to see that he didn't just collapse under the pressure that White put him under. And there was a lot of pressure on his queen side, so good stuff there. Chess for Tigers no doubt played a role in helping with this practical side of things, and I've actually read this book as well on his recommendation, so I do also recommend this book for anyone who wants some tips. The other really interesting moment in this game was whether to play the Dutch with f5 or knight f6 like he did in the game. And to be fair, after knight f6, g3 could have been an oversight. I'm not sure he explained in the video whether he took this into consideration, transposing into some lines that he's not comfortable with. He called them Benoni-esque and Sicilian-esque positions that aren't Benonis or Sicilians, where they're clearly not Benonis or Sicilians. There's no central pawns or pawn tension. It's actually kind of amusing to call them Benoni-esque or Sicilian-esque. But in any case, I think it's always going to be the correct decision not to let your opponent steer you away from your repertoire that early. I think worst case scenario, according to Michael, on f5 was just getting into a classical Dutch main line. And if that's the worst case scenario, at least you're in your repertoire, you're not in someone else's territory. And of course, the other option is just to book up on everything that you're not too sure about, like in those G3 systems where C4, D4 aren't played, no central pawn tension. It's conceivable in those lines that you find a solution that works for you, although if it's purely a stylistic concern and you simply can't tolerate a position without central pawn tension in the opening, then I would be secure in your decision to push f5 and go for a Dutch, because these dynamics are really what the Dutch player thrives on, and I'm sure you know. If he plays perfectly in a classical Dutch, what can you do? But that's going to be the case no matter what opening you arrive at. So those are my thoughts on the opening. In any case, I hope you enjoyed the video like I did and learned something from it, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.